Okay, boys and girls, in this video, we're going to learn multiplicity, and we're going to use multiplicity to graph a polynomial. So what is multiplicity? Multiplicity is the number of times a given polynomial equation has a root at a given point. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of give you some examples with this. We've talked about it a little bit, but I just want to define it a little bit more. If we notice in this first polynomial, every factor has an exponent of 1. So this polynomial has no multiplicity, or the multiplicity is 1, because every factor is raised to the first power. So how do we find the zeros? The zeros are, we learned from a previous video, x minus 2 equals 0, x plus 3 equals 0, and x minus 1 equals 0. Now in a minute I'm going to stop writing this out and just go straight to the answer. So we get x equals 2, x equals negative 3, x equals 1. What we see is that the opposite of what you see is the actual root. So when you have x minus 2, the root is actually 2. When you have x plus 3, the root is actually x equals negative 3. So these are the zeros. The zeros are 2, negative 3, and 1. And because each of these are raised to the power of 1, its multiplicity is 1. Normally we don't say that it has a multiplicity of 1, but just for purposes I'm showing you that. And so how do we find the degree? We add the multiplicities. So the degree is 3. Okay, if we look at the next one, it has, how many zeros does it have? It has 2 zeros. It has a 0 at 3 and a 0 at 4. So the multiplicity at 3 is 1 because there's an understood 1 there, and the multiplicity of 4 is 2. So what is the degree of this polynomial? The degree of this polynomial is also 3. Okay? So we're going to look at the next one. And remember, there is a understood 1 here. So when we're solving this polynomial, we have to solve for that factor, this factor, and this factor. So we have 3 factors that we're solving for. The first one is simply, remember that x still just means at negative x is equal to 0, so x is equal to 0. So we have 0 is one of our zeros. This one we can look at and say it's negative 3, and this one is 2. So the multiplicity of 0 is 1 because of the exponent. The multiplicity of negative 3 is 5. The multiplicity of 2 is 4. So what is the degree of this polynomial? 6, 10. The degree of that polynomial is 10. Okay? So again, 2 is not a factor. 2 is a factor, but it has no x, so it's not dealing with the degree. So we have 1, 2, 3 solutions. 1, 2, 3 solutions. Okay? So that first solution is negative 4, 1, and negative 3. So we have negative 4, 1, and negative 3. So the multiplicity of the 4 is 3, because that's its exponent. The multiplicity of 1, remember there's an understood 1 here, that multiplicity is simply 1. And the multiplicity of the last one is 2. So what's the total degree? 3, 4, 6 is that degree. Okay? Now, so here's what we know about multiplicity. If the multiplicity is even, the graph will touch the x-axis and not cross it. So what that means is that the graph would do something like this. It's going to touch that x-axis. I like to say it kisses the x-axis. It's a little shy. It kisses the x-axis and then bounce back. So that is even multiplicity. If the multiplicity is odd, the graph will cross the x-axis. So if it's odd, it actually looks like this. So each of these has odd multiplicity. Sometimes what you'll see on the graph is that it crosses the graph, but it kind of rests for a second, and then it goes back up. And so if you see it resting for a second, you know that it has multiplicity greater than 1. Alrighty, what we're going to do is we're going to use multiplicity and end behavior to sort of graph sections, graph a polynomial. So the first thing we want to do is we want to find the 0 and tell its multiplicity. So we see in this one, if we set this equal to 0, we have 2 zeros. The first one is -2, and the second one is 3. Because remember, we are just taking this and setting it equal to 0 and setting this equal to 0. So we have x plus 2 equals 0 and x minus 3 equals 0. And we get x is equal to -2, x is equal to 3. All right, so it has 2 zeros. What is the multiplicity of the -2? Remember, the multiplicity is the exponent. So the multiplicity of -2 is 2. The multiplicity of the 3, there's an understood 1 there, is 1. So what is the degree of this polynomial? 2 plus 1 is 3. It's odd. What is my leading coefficient? My leading coefficient is the number here, so it's 1 and it's positive. So we're going to use what we learned in the previous video and multiplicity to graph this. So we know we have a 0 at -2. And because it has even multiplicity, it's going to, I'm going to put an E here to tell me that it has even multiplicity. It's just going to kiss the graph. And then we have another 0 at 3, 1, 2, 3, and it's odd, so it's going to go through the graph. Now, I need to figure out what it looks like. So because my leading coefficient is positive and my degree is odd, it's going to look sort of like that. Okay? So because I know the basic shape of it, I know it's going to start at the bottom and go up. And then when it gets to this 0, it's not going to go through because it's even. It's going to kiss it and bounce back. Well, somewhere it has to go back up, and when it gets to this one, it's going to go through the x-axis. So the basic shape of it looks something like that. Okay? Let's do the next one. This one has 3 zeros, and so we have a 0 here, here, and here. Okay, so we have 3 zeros. And hopefully at this point, I don't have to solve for each of them. You can tell me that the zeros are -3, 6, and -8. And they each have a multiplicity of 1. Because my exponent and all of these are 1. It's understood 1. So what is the degree of this? 3. Okay, now that I have the degree, I need to figure out the leading coefficient here is negative. And so 3 is odd. So what does that look like? Well, if we go back to what we did before, we have a negative and it's odd. Our polynomial is going to look like this. Okay, so to figure out how to graph that, we're going to start by graphing the zeros. So we have -3, 6, 4, 5, 6, and -8. I'm just going to, I think that's -7, so I'm going to say -8 is here. Okay, now because the multiplicity of all of them are odd, that means that the graph will go through the x-axis there. And because the leading coefficient is negative and it's odd, that means our graph is going to look sort of like this. Like that. Okay? So I'm going to start at the top. I'm going to go through this because it's odd. Somewhere along the way, I have to go back up through the one at -3. And then somewhere along the way, I have to hit this one. Now, this is just a guess because we don't know those turning points just yet. Okay, So let's look at this one. We have, how many zeros do we have? We have 3 zeros, and they are at 5, -2, and 1. And the multiplicity of 5 is 5. The multiplicity of -2 is 1. And the multiplicity of 1 is 2. Because remember, we're just looking at the exponents. So that gives me a degree of 5, 6, 7, 8. And my leading coefficient is -3. So my leading coefficient is negative. Okay? So I have even degree with the negative coefficient. So that means my polynomial is going to look something like this. Okay? And my zeros, so now I'm going to graph my zeros. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. -2 and 1. Okay? So I know my graph because it has a leading coefficient that's negative and has even degree. I know it's going to start down here somewhere. And when it gets to -2, I forgot to write, this is odd, at 1 is even, and this is odd. So because at -2 it has odd multiplicity, it's going to go through that graph. Then when it comes down here to -2, it has even. That means it's going to bounce. It's going to bounce back up. And then somewhere it's going to have to go through this, and then because it's odd, it goes through it. So you can see, even though the left side of that's kind of jacked up, you can see how this is going to be its basic shape. I didn't like the way that leg was. Like that. It's not much better, but it's a little bit. Alrighty. I wanted you to try the last one and pause the video and come back and we'll talk about it. Okay, welcome back. We have 2 zeros. So our zeros are 0 and -5. And the multiplicity of 0 is 2. The multiplicity of 5 is 3. And so our degree is 2 plus 3, it's 5. And our leading coefficient is positive. It's +3. Okay, so what does that look like? So I have a positive coefficient and an odd degree. So that means my graph will look something like this. Okay? So I only have 2 zeros. I have one at 0 and I have one at -5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay? And the one at 0 has even multiplicity. The one at -5 has odd. So I know I'm going to start from -infinity and come up. And when I hit this one, because it has odd multiplicity, I'm going to go through. And somewhere along the line, I got to hit the 0, turn back to hit that 0, but we're going to bounce through it. And so it would look like that. Okay? One last thing before we go. We're going to look at graphs and try to determine a function for it in factored form. So to do that, we have to find the zeros. So I have a 0 here, a 0 here. Okay? So I know that it's going to be the opposite. So this is -1, -2. This is -3, -1, and 2. So and when I put them in factored form, it's the opposite of what I see. So this would be x plus 3, x plus 1, and then x minus 2. Okay? So what is the highest degree this polynomial can be? Well, we know that the highest degree has to be at least 3 because I have 3 zeros. But looking at its shape, it looks like it's even. So I know that the degree then is 4 because I have to add 1 because it has to be at least 4 to have 3 zeros. Okay? So my zeros are -3, -1, and 2. So at -3, it goes through the graph. So at -3, my multiplicity has to be odd, so I'm going to say it's 1. At -1, it also goes through that graph, so I'm going to say it's 1 as well, although I think it's probably 3. And the reason I say it's 3 because it kind of slowed down there, but we're not going to talk about that here. And at 2, it bounced, so it has to have even multiplicity. So if we look at this, we can say that it's 2, 3, 4. It has to be at least degree 4. And our leading coefficient is going to be some positive number. I don't know what that is. I just make it up. So let's say it's 2. I just know it's positive. Okay? So let's look at the next one. We have to look at our zeros. And we have 3 zeros. One is at -5. One is that 0? One is at, no. And one is at 4. Okay? So, to write my polynomial is y is equal to, oh, I'm sorry, I'd have to go back and fix this because we know we have multiplicity of 2 here, so I have to make that a 2. So for this one, I have y is equal to x plus 5, because I do the opposite of my 0, and x minus 4. So, my multiplicity here is odd because it went through. So I'm going to say it's 1, although I think it's 3 because of the way it went through. And then my multiplicity here has to be even. So I'm going to say it's 2. I don't really know, I'm just guessing. And my coefficient has to be negative because it's going in the opposite direction. So I'm going to say it's just negative. So what's my degree? 3. And my leading coefficient has to be negative because it came from positive infinity. Okay? Try the next two. You pause the video and try the next two and come back and I'll show you the answers. Okay? Welcome back. We have a 0 at -4. And we have a 0 at 4. So those are my zeros. For the first one at -4, it's going to be odd. So I'm going to say it has a degree of 1. And the one at +4, it has a degree of 2. Now, it could have a higher degree. It could be 2, 4, 6, or it could be 1. We don't know. I'm just saying this is the least it could be. Because of the shape, I know that my leading coefficient is positive. And my degree has to be at least 3 and odd. So my equation is y is equal to x plus 4 and x minus 4 squared. Okay? And the last one, I have zeros at -4 and 4. And they're both even because it touches the graph there. So they're both even multiplicity. So my graph could be x plus 4 squared or x minus 4 squared. So, and my leading coefficient is negative. And the highest degree, the lowest degree it could be is 4. So that's going to make that negative. Okie dokie, boys and girls. That's it for graphing based upon multiplicity and the degree and the leading coefficient. There is practice on your iExcels.